Award-winning.
While people are getting settled, I did want to let a little bit of our history so if there are history issues that come up, please get back to you as needed, especially since
Okay, thanks. Well, we're still having some members come back to join us here, slowly but surely. But our last session of the day, we saved the most exciting for last in data and assessment science. So hopefully everybody has their caffeine. I couldn't resist, sorry. I'm more of a policy person, so yeah, I like to poke fun at the science and data people. So I couldn't, now that we have award winners up here, I couldn't resist sitting up just to give a quick intro to this to kind of tee up the folks that actually know what they're talking about related to the assessment and the data portal. So the plan for the next hour approximately is to hear about the assessment. And Courtney Hahn, who has joined us as a staffer and been working really hard on this, will share the latest update on what's been going into this, building on some work that started last year. And she'll give an update on that, and then we'll hand it over to Andy and Steve to talk about the latest with the data portal. We're penciling in roughly about a half hour, 20 minutes, half hour of presentations, and then we have a half hour allotted for discussion. So you'll have some questions teed up. The team up here will sit and field those and throw some things at you that will be really helpful to get feedback on and continue our conversation moving forward. So just as a reminder before Courtney gets started, where this assessment piece is at and kind of where it came from, those thinking back to our meeting last year in Portland, at our last annual meeting, we had an update from staff at the Center for Ocean Solutions out of Stanford on an initial inventory that would inform this assessment. The background on the assessment is that the RPBs that are active in pursuing a regional plan are charged with developing a regional ocean assessment in support of that, really focused on the science piece. So how is science going to inform planning to really provide that groundwork for what planning products come forth and how science is being used and how it's being identified and shared. So we on the West Coast realized that we are not coming into a vacuum related to science, quite the opposite. There's a lot of work happening that's been happening for a number of years and decades around the California current and the West Coast from a number of sources, whether government, whether academic, NGO, and otherwise. And so as a starting point, we wanted to get an inventory of that. And so that was the first step, and the Center for Ocean Solutions helped us with that. The presentation given at last year's meeting was a table that included a spreadsheet with a number of studies that were out there. It wasn't everything because it's hard to get everything at the first try, but it was an attempt to start that. And so we tried to start to capture that, worked through that over the last year, reached out to all of you and others to try and make sure we were filling in those gaps and identifying the science and assessment products that were out there. And basically we took that and handed it to Courtney and our assessment team and the data portal and said, what can we do with this to kind of keep moving this forward? And so Courtney's going to dive into more detail on that, how she started to work through the existing inventory, developed it into this new document, connected it with an issue map that we worked on last year. So that will be something she talks about. Just as context on that, as a reminder, this was a map that we developed based on getting feedback from RPB members and then also those that attended our meeting last year, as well as our public listserv on ocean planning issues that people were dealing with. So when you see the map up there, it's not meant to be a comprehensive map of every issue. It's not meant to be any kind of final set of issues or areas that we've developed. It was more informative in the sense of what are the examples and the issues that you're all dealing with that you see as important. And when thinking about an assessment, how can we use that to then step into the science that we need and effectively identify where we go next in terms of filling gaps, really speaking to where the science and also to the data is going to inform any planning that we support or existing planning products that we can help make better. So that's all I have, and I'll hand it over to Courtney to take it from there.
Okay, so this fall, what we've been working on is taking that large inventory, which is essentially quite a large Excel document with a bunch of different categories and different tabs, and making that into one kind of searchable Excel document where you can search for specific studies based on the region. So you can search for all studies in Oregon or Washington, and also based on the category. In addition, we compiled a Word document that synthesized all of the data into kind of easy to read tables. And we just did this as a way for people to more accessibly understand what the data is available in the assessment inventory. And then as John mentioned, we overlap the data with the ocean planning issues exercise that was done. So now we're really looking for feedback, and first I'm going to kind of introduce everything, and then we can get feedback during the comment session. So this is just giving you a visual representation. 2016, we had a very large Excel spreadsheet with our inventory. Now we still have an Excel spreadsheet that's large, but it's only one sheet, and it's easier, in my opinion, to search through it. We also have a Word document that talks about kind of the purpose of the ocean assessment, as well as a number of tables. And these tables are color-coded for convenience of quickly identifying where we have areas with lots of studies and lots of peer-reviewed studies that are shown in the dark blue, to areas where we have very few studies or no studies or few peer-reviewed studies, which are the dark red colors. So basically, the purpose of this ocean assessment is to provide an information resource, and this resource can be used by sub-regional planning teams, by people in their everyday use, and possibly by the whole regional planning team, depending on the level of depth you want to get into. And it can be used to identify both data gaps as well as prioritize future research and direction for the ocean assessment project. So the whole idea is you can use it, as I said, as both individually in your personal everyday lives, working with your particular entity, or within the RPB as the sub-regional team or as the regional framework. And it can really, the purpose of it is to be a tool to facilitate discussion. So an easy way to look at data for your particular region and start to get those questions answered of, where do we have data gaps, and where should we target potential future efforts? So how the document is broken up, we first have an overall summary table that just presents all the data. Then we have a number of tables that connect the inventory data back to the issue map exercise. There's a directory user guide that is just on how to use the Excel spreadsheet, how to navigate it and search for specific studies, as well as tables that are for each subregion that include very detailed summaries of all different types of studies for each subregion and the number of studies. So this is the overall summary table, and it just shows on the left-hand side different categories broken into biological and human, and then on the top we have our different subregions broken between Washington, Oregon, Northern California, Central California, and Southern California, and then the sum in total. In addition to showing the total number of studies, we also show the number of peer-reviewed studies as the first number in the parentheses, the number of agency studies, and the number of NGO and university studies. And this was done because the color coding weights the peer-reviewed studies a bit higher than the other studies, so that you get an idea of both the number of studies as well as the quality. And so here you see two different cells that each have a total number of 17 studies, but one is colored blue for the Washington biogeographic cell, and the other is a light red color for the Oregon management cell. And that's because the Oregon management cell has a fewer number of peer-reviewed studies. So this is just kind of the framework for color coordination used throughout the process, so that if you are using it as a resource, you can quickly look at it, and within 5 seconds you can identify kind of general trends. The second set of tables connects back to the issue map. So blue document shown on the left there was the issue map exercise. So this exercise determined what were the top issues for each subregion as well as regionally along the West Coast. And basically we combine that information with all of the inventory data to produce 6 different issue map tables. And this gets at what are our top priority issues and do we have data on those according to the inventory records. And so I'm just going to go into one example, but all of them are presented in the document. So because we're in Southern California, I pulled up the Southern California example, and this one lists the number, or on the left-hand side, you have the different categories, and these categories were based on both the issue map and then on other categories needed to fill all the studies. And then on the top, you have the issue map ranking. So number 1 means that those are the primary issues for Southern California. They were chosen to be fisheries and renewable energy. And then the percent of peer-reviewed studies is also shown in parentheses to give you an idea of the quality of the studies. So once again, the dark blue colors indicate studies that are higher and have a higher number of peer-reviewed studies, and then the red are ones that are either less studies or have a lower percent of peer-reviewed studies. So the idea of how to use these tables is that you can quickly look at this and see, okay, the primary issues rated for Southern California are fisheries and renewable energy. But between those two, it's very obvious that fisheries has more studies, according to our inventory assessment, than the renewable energy. And so if you're going to choose one of those areas to put more effort into or allocate more resources, then it might help you make that decision as either a sub-regional planning level, the regional planning level, or in your day-to-day interactions. Then lastly, we have detailed summaries, and this doesn't show the whole detailed summary because I wanted you to be able to read part of it. It's quite long, and there's one for each subregion, and so this is just showing part of the detailed summary for Central California, and this is showing you it really goes into a greater amount of detail of the category. So for physical, we don't just have the total number of studies listed, we have it broken down into more specifics. So those that cover climate change, ocean acidification, oxygen minimum zone, etc. So this number is then shown on the right-hand side, and it allows you to identify how many studies there are for the particular region of interest for a very specific topic. So the idea is that these detailed summaries are going to be used for looking at very specific questions and for doing a preliminary assessment of what type of information is already out there. And then to access that information, you can go to the Excel spreadsheet and easily search for it. So you can search by both the subregion, so you can search for Central California, for example, and then you can also search by the specific category. So this is just showing that there's drop-down menus, and so all of them have filters, so you can drop it down and select exactly which category you're interested in finding studies for. And you can also filter by the geographic area. So if it's a 1, that indicates that a study occurs in that region. And as you can see, a lot of these studies occur over multiple different areas, and so they cover multiple regions. In addition, you can get information on the agency that produced the report, who to contact, as well as a link to the agency report or to the scientific publication or to the whatever resources presented. If it is publicly available, then we have updated all the links, and the links are there for you to access. There's also a section that just provides a brief summary of notes on it. So essentially, this Excel directory is for use to get a preliminary idea of what type of studies are in the area of particular interest. So the next steps are really to get feedback from both RPB members and the public. We're looking to see where you would like the ocean assessment to go. The purpose of this project that we have been completed this fall is to make the inventory data more visually accessible and more usable. And so we want to know is it usable? Is this a good idea? Or should we totally change directions? And also the information is going to be presented along with some of the data portal work at the 2018 Ocean Sciences meeting. And it's going to be presented in basically, it's called a town hall meeting, but it's a forum where we can get feedback from a lot of different scientists in the field and be able to get some more direction. In addition, there is potential talk of integrating the ocean assessment more into the West Coast data portal, and this is something that is done on the East Coast, but how the East Coast did it is they looked at specific examples and topics of interest and integrated that data into the ocean data portal instead of all of it. Right now, not all of the inventory data is in the data portal because that would be quite time consuming to do. And so just to reiterate, at the end when we get public comment, we're looking for feedback on how likely you are to use this document and the tables presented, on what information is missing. And one thing to take note of is that there is inevitably missing information in the inventory. It was done last year, and I mean, myself and other people have noticed that there's some information that's not there, but to do a full assessment of all the data available on the entire West Coast is a huge task. So really determining if that's a priority, then we can make that happen. But if that's not a priority, then what areas should we focus on for looking at what data is there if we want to create an extensive inventory? And then lastly, thinking about how the ocean assessment data should be presented. We want the ocean assessment to be that primary data inventory that tells you the number of studies for specific regions and for specific topics, or do you want it to be more of a storytelling structure that was done on the East Coast? So Marco did a really excellent job of presenting different data, both with words as well as photos and with data, and integrating that data into the data portal. And those were done for specific topics of interest on the East Coast. So that is an avenue that the West Coast can take, but we're just looking for feedback from everybody on where you would like to go in the future. And I'll pass it on. Yeah, so I can take questions now, if anyone would like them.
So you have it by sub-regions. Are those sub-regions do a reference to latitude and longitude coordinates, so that if you're looking at lining up with state lines and inquiry, that you're able to access what's done in certain geographic problems?
Sure, that's a great question. So right now, basically, it's just listed as, it'll list if it's included anywhere within Oregon, anywhere within Northern California, Central and Southern, and it's not linked through, it doesn't have a lat long, basically, that links it directly. It was based on the work done in 2016, and if the inventory that was done by Lucy didn't provide a specific geographic area, because sometimes she would just say the California current, then I'd look at where the study was done. But that is definitely a really good point to bring up, of being more specific on where the study is, because some of these studies are very specifically located. So it may say it occurs in Southern California, but it may really only occur within the San Diego County, for example. And so if that is an area of concern, then we can definitely adjust it, to reflect a specific geographic area. And maybe we can use coordinates as a way to easily kind of define where it is for searching. Yeah.
Can this layout help us with identifying data gaps?
So I think it does, personally. So this is just showing the other different issue maps for, there's Southern California, Central, Northern California, Oregon, Washington, regional. And the other reason why I personally broke these up into these categories because that is how the issue map exercise was broken into. And so I used the same categories, so it was easy to overlap them. And so how it can be used to identify data gaps is by looking at where we have more studies and higher number of peer-reviewed studies, then perhaps there is less of a data gap in those ones versus where you have here it shows, there's hardly any studies in Northern California on traditional harvesting or on public access and recreation, even though those are listed as number 2 priority. And perhaps the reason why there's no studies listed is because we don't have all of those studies within the inventory. But another reason is that there is just less availability of them, and that could be a way to, in your discussions as sub-regional groups or within your own entities, to look at perhaps this is an area that we would want to focus our efforts on because there are more data gaps. And the one thing I do want to emphasize is the one caveat to this whole assessment is that it's very difficult to have all of the data on the West Coast in the inventory, and there will definitely be errors. So this is just the first step based on what was done in 2016. So at least it gives a good general idea of what's happening, but I would take it with a grain of salt instead of saying this is definitely the only study. There's definitely only one study done because there's probably more.
Sorry. Well, they bring up the slides too, and just to clarify, we'll have time to discuss and I think keep sort of fielding questions, and Andy's going to present on the portal now, but I think as you think of questions or additional thoughts on this, this is definitely a big topic, and so I think clarifying questions, but also the broader stuff we'll have a chance to discuss here before we finish up.
Courtney, this is Patty Organ. I did have one question. I noticed you had a question. Would we rather have it presented as an inventory or as like storyboards? Couldn't we do both? One that's more of a resource for folks actually doing research, and the other for more folks that were just more interested in a different level. Shall we say?
We could. So one thing about presenting it as a data inventory, that's definitely, there's a lot of behind the scene work to doing that. That isn't necessarily as obvious. And I'm sure you guys will talk about that as well. So I'm definitely, yes, we can do both, but what I think the RPB is limited by is probably resources. So if it's me and Andy and Steve working on it, then we just, I think, we just have to be realistic in what can be accomplished. But if we get more funding, then it's good to know that you're interested in both. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I would just add too, for the additional background on the assessment, the idea isn't necessarily that this initial work would then inform what we would take on as a whole new assessment or a whole new round of science, or the gap filling needed to really address what we identify as gaps related to certain issues, whatever that might be. I think because of the state of the RPB and the capacity we have, and looking to technical experts that would probably be more appropriate for that. It's more, what can we identify as a group that can speak to consensus around where those gaps are, what those issues are, so we can feed that back to an agency or a tribe or a grant opportunity, whatever it might be, to then say, we've all agreed this is a key topic and we don't have enough science around it. We need to find a way to address that. And that wouldn't be something the RPB would do necessarily, but it would be something we could feed to others. But I think the initial phase, right now we're in that sausage making of how do we get that information captured? How do we then take the message in a clear way, get that input from all of you, and make sure we're representing your input as well, and bringing in other outside parties, scientific experts, NGOs, industry, and others to help with that conversation as well.
All right. Well, my name is Andy Lanier. Thank you for allowing us to be here today to speak to you as a group. I'm well aware that we are the last presentation, and I've also heard the data portal mentioned many times today. So I'm hoping to maybe fly through these so that there's more time for discussion and less time for hearing my own voice. So I will be your flight navigator. I will give the presentation, and Steve's going to answer all your questions. One of the challenges of going at the end of the day is that you may have had talking points in your slides that have already been addressed. But needless to say, I think emphasizing these kind of current themes or thinking is very important. And one of the things that I wanted to do as I addressed you today is bring us back to this concept of what is marine spatial planning. That concept is what originated all of this activity around the country with the National Ocean Policy. And to think about those goals of marine spatial planning, I think is very important. And we've heard lots of ways that has been discussed today. This is just a kind of high-level summary of a study that was recently conducted that looked at these spatial planning efforts across the world. John, my slide's getting cut off, so there's a reference on the bottom that you can't see. These slides will be available if you're interested in these studies. The reference is there for you. In short, marine spatial planning is really an attempt by all of us to go through an iterative process where we try and break down borders, understand how we can collaborate and coordinate better, and what the conflicts in our marine space are, and how we can develop alternatives around them, and how we can address those as we move forward in a smart way. There are a lot of actions that can be brought into any particular spatial planning exercise. They're listed here, and they run the gamut from research to analysis, to planning, to financing, to how you keep this thing going, because it's an iterative process that has to happen over and over again to be effective. And where our brains are, Steve and my brains are, is the spatial tasks of that. How do you take information? How do you coordinate that type of resource in a way that makes sense so that people can digest it, can find it, and can use it? And I thought it would be useful to provide a summary of kind of decision support tools that are out there and the functions that they can help to perform. So, in the spatial planning kind of process wheels, you define your goals, your objectives, you gather the information, you come up with what are those constraints or what are those conflicts and uses. And then as part of that process matures, you develop those alternatives, you evaluate whether or not the plan that you implement actually meets those goals and objectives, and then you start over again, because the world is a continuous exercise, and we will be addressing these and moving forward with these as our world changes. So where are we in this world of planning? And again, this process wheel of spatial planning with the goals and the gathering data is really where I think that we are as a group. I still hear this group struggling with what is the goal of this exercise and how are we going to define success. And as a data portal, that's been challenging because it's like a tug steering the large ship. We have a certain amount of resources and time, and this is a pretty large effort. And how can we effectively maneuver in concert with you so that we get to the right place that we want to go and we get there efficiently? So a lot of our work, and I really want to recognize the work that Courtney and others have done on the ocean health assessment, because that's really the first piece of concrete data and evidence that I've seen that's come out of this group, that we can maybe have a product that's tangible and used to work in the continued development of our portal. And when we developed our portal, we kind of had a different world view or focus in the development of it. And there, as already described, there are a lot of other ways that portals or tools can be engaged in a planning process, whether that's decision support or visualization. When we established our portal, it was based upon the curation of a catalog of information. And that catalog of information was not gathered and stored in a single place in our portal warehouse, so to speak. It's actually just a set of records that exist that are provided by entities up and down the West Coast. And that was done purposefully because we were asked not to build anything that was duplicative or inefficient or would be competing with a group that's already out there doing something on the ground, because there are a number of tool developers, there are a number of projects that are out there that are focused and do a really good job of what they need to do and want to do. And all we want to do is provide a holistic view of where those things are located and how you can get at them, right? Because the last thing we want to have to do is to be managing those data sets over time and update them for everybody that's there. We want the entities to develop the capacity to serve that information that we can pull and then use, right? So we have roughly the same capabilities as other portals that have been established, although our focus has been to date on the catalog curation. And in a sense, you guys haven't even been our target audience for that, because we were established under the West Coast Governors Alliance on Ocean Health. So they had a set of priorities that we used when we generated the first set of catalog information. And it would be misleading to say that we've done the effort to go out there to collect the information based upon your set of priorities. But that's what we have an opportunity to do today. And in the rest of the presentation, I'll try and focus a little bit on that, as well as kind of the support levels that can get you to different places depending upon how much support is available. But one of the things I want to point out is that in an effort to try and take a pulse of this large group, we had John send you guys out a link to a questionnaire. And this is going to help us to, again, identify from individuals what your priorities are, how you've used the data. And so this is, I would encourage you to all go fill out this 5-minute, really just 5-minute questionnaire that can help us as we have our discussion on Thursday. 11 members have already done this, so thank you for those of you who have done that. Others, we would appreciate it if you could do that by the end of the day tomorrow so that we can use that content on Thursday for our interactive sessions. So here's the home page of the portal, and as mentioned already, the catalog curation function was our real priority. And if you notice the discovery, the connection to, and the information, are 3 key things that we as a portal team focused our efforts on, right? So how do you find the information that's relevant to a process that you're involved in? How do you connect to it? And potentially whether that's actually receiving the data or getting the data from that portal, or whether that's asking somebody who knows where the data is, because there's a community of practitioners that's out there that we've built to help make those connections so that somebody can pick up a phone and say, hey, Andy, do you know if this data set exists? Why, yes, actually I do. Or no, but that's a good question. Let me direct you to the person that I know about that can get you there. Right, so that discovery, the connection, and the information, the inform part, right, is also very important, because it's not just the data that's important, it's the context around the data that informs a decision, right? So we have focused some of our efforts on building some information products that can help you all as members of the RPB to move forward and improve the portal collectively as a community. We had this slide last year, but it's grown since then. And I wanted to provide this not only today as a record of the things that we've done in completion to support our portal, but also for you guys as a reference after the presentation, so that you know, oh, hey, there's that slide. I can go find this resource that I know exists. So we have links to the webinars that were conducted earlier this year, where I described the background of the portal, where we talk about how it was generated, etc. And then we have resources, as mentioned already, that help you to discover or connect to the data in a number of different ways, right? And there are a number of technologies that are out there today that can help to facilitate this process, and we strive to meet as many of those as we can. So whether that's connections to metadata through a web accessible folder or catalog service for the web. You know, it's our job to understand how those technologies work and to facilitate the use of those technologies for us to make the portal better. As I mentioned, that this community is only going to get stronger as we all engage and produce information and resources that can be pulled into the portal. There's some amazing set of technological support and training resources that are available from our network site. They provide links to not only how you can appropriately fill out your metadata so that it can be imported into the portal or connected into the portal, but also just the basic concepts behind some of those things, how you do it, what you would need to do, right? So all of the building blocks are there. And then, as I mentioned, the analysis or the communication of some of the information that we have available to us. We did produce 2 story maps for you last year. They were how are ocean conditions changing and how our ocean use is changing. And they give you a sense of the many issues and topics and data resources, but they combine the ability to have a text piece of information together with a geographic representation of that information together as a communication tool. So that is an option that we can do to help you in the future, whether it's at the regional level or sub-regional level, to create an information product that could be a guide to a specific thematic question or issue. But there are also other opportunities or ways that we can do this. So that's just a brief summary of the resources that are there. I want to go talk next about what it is to say that we're successful, right? We're at a point in time, the portal is a point in time where with the infusion of resources and time and effort, we can really have a high level of success. So we would be up there in that really hard to read zone of high aspirations. On the other hand, if the amount of engagement and the amount of support dwindles, then we will be in that growing zone of desperation, right? So where we go from here is really dictated by how we all engage as a community, because we will be asking for your input, your participation in the next phase of our work. And I want to describe a little bit about that. But again, I want to remind you of the challenge of supporting this effort in this community, given that we were originally formed under the umbrella of the West Coast Governors Alliance on Ocean Health. They have provided a structure and a format for us to engage with, as well as a set of priorities that we were asked to then help to address. And now we are under the umbrella, or 2 umbrellas potentially, of the regional and sub-regional planning teams. And how do we as a community correctly engage or get guidance and wisdom from you as a community so that we have somebody who says, yes, that's what we want you to do, go do it. And then when we're done with it, says, yes, that's great, it meets my expectations, or no, that doesn't, and I would like you to do something in addition to what you've already done, right? So there's an element of a chain of command that we are still a little bit uncertain about in terms of how we engage with the RPB and or the sub-regional planning teams to find that direction, to make sure that we're not responding to too many cooks in the kitchen. All right, so that's one of the challenges that we continue to face. We have transitioned away from kind of a 3 working group model to more of a 2 working group model. And those are our portal coordination team, which really, I think, focuses on the big picture thinking between how is it that we as a portal need to engage and then respond to the actions of the RPB or the sub-regional planning teams from a data prioritization example or a function of a portal perspective, right? So we need to get guidance from these entities. And then the portal development team works with that coordination team to say, okay, if you want to do this, then technically these are the options to actually implement that. Right, so there's 2 working groups that are up and functioning, although I'd have to say that their participation has been somewhat limited. And to a degree, that's because we are still waiting for direction from you all as to the appropriate path to take. We did receive funding from the Moore Foundation and from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to continue our work. And as a part of that, we've developed a grant program, and we have focused that grant program on some data catalog tasks. The first of which is that we do recognize that the ocean assessment provides an opportunity for us to focus on the data and the resources that have been identified through that effort, as well as the information resources that already exist in our catalog. And then the known resources that you as entities know about from your experience working in your own communities, right? So there's a delta there. We have something in our portal. We have an ocean assessment that we can use to then build on those records. But because that may or may not be complete, depending upon the time that that ocean assessment was completed and today, we are going to be asking you all to help us to review the data that's in the portal, to help us understand the appropriate curation terms, extents, methods for how you want the records that we're going to pull into the portal to be sliced and diced, so that when you're at that homepage of our portal and you hit search, you're going to get the record that's most relevant to that search for you, and that's relevant to the priorities of the portal community. In addition, there's going to be work on potentially the incorporation of other catalogs that may be important to you into the portal. I saw potentially 2 examples of that today. One with the database and work that is going on with the process for offshore wind energy siting that's being led by BOEM. Another with the Washington group that has just completed their marine spatial planning exercises. Those are both, I would imagine, high priority catalogs that you would love to see those records be reflected into the portal and to be able to view those in our map viewer, right? So let's put the time and effort in to make sure that we are connected to those efforts if that's a high priority for you. One of the concepts that we've come up with as a data portal is that of a data diplomat. So while many of you participating here with us today use data and information, you might not be the one who's actually typing the ones and zeros or manipulating data in your data systems. And in many ways, that's the person that we need you to tell them to engage with us, right? So you're going to have staff in your agencies that are most familiar with your resources, that are going to potentially be able to spend some time and energy to make sure that those resources are shared in a way with us so that we can bring them into the catalog, right? So we are going to depend upon a data diplomat, probably within your organizations, to work with us on the improvement of our catalog. So I would imagine sometime this spring, we're going to put out a call, and hopefully you have the capability or the ability within your programs to say, Andy, I want you to engage in this, provide them feedback on your catalog, and make these high priority data sets that we know about available in the portal, right? Because the portal is only going to be as good as the data that's in there, right? You don't want somebody to go there and not find a resource that's important to you if that's going to be the mechanism and the agreement that you use as a community to move your regional planning process forward, as an agreement about the data that you're using to make decisions, right? So that'll be an important part, and we would love your engagement with us this coming year as we work to embark on this process that we upgrade our catalog with the most current relevant data for your process. The other program focus area of work is on this additional generation of an information analysis or tool that can help you, right? So a Storymap was one example of how we've been able to package and communicate data sets that are available and out there, or resources that are important for evaluating a certain decision. And that's one tool, but there are many other places and many other types of functions that can be developed in a portal. We just have to have an understanding of what the desired functions from you are. We do have a modest tool development or technology development budget that came with our MORE grant. And so help us help you by understanding what those functions and what those information products are that you're going to find most valuable. I personally really like the idea of changing ocean conditions as a priority goal for entities that are involved in this. And you will hear tomorrow from the Bren students who have been working on identifying, in concert with the Pacific Coast Collaborative, an inventory of ocean acidification and monitoring assets that are up and down the coast, right? That would be a fantastic thing to build a tool around potentially. But that, again, depends upon you as a community developing that priority and saying that's what we would like, right? Because we can't read your minds, and that's going to be very helpful for us. So now I'm going to move on to support for our portal as a whole. And the first level of support is just keeping the lights on, right? That diagram represents the Internet of Things, right? And with things becoming more connected to our internet over time, and with information being digested by smartphones, tablets, you name it, right? We have to continue to have the ability to reach those places and those people by having our site being up online. So keeping the portal alive on our server, having somebody that's available to update service packs for security issues, that's crucial, because we need to be able to keep the lights on if you want to be able to depend upon this. So a relatively modest investment will get you there. And we are currently hosting our infrastructure, the West Coast Marine Debris Database that was developed under the WCGA, and the climate change funding catalog that was built back then. So those things are alive and available on the web because of our server infrastructure. And I have to thank Steve and his shop for being willing to take on that role in helping to support the portal. Baum's providing the funding, but he's providing the staff and the infrastructure. The next kind of level of support is project coordination. And I think about outreach in association with that coordination, because without effective outreach, then how are we going to actually engage you all in this process of improving our portal as we move forward, right? So there is a need for a project coordinator to be able to help us to administer our grant, to make sure that we're on time, to make sure that we reach out at the appropriate times to the entities that need to be involved. Neither Steve nor I have time to be a project coordinator on another large project, because we are already wearing a number of hats for our own individual agencies. So this will be crucial for us to have effective development over time. We do have a technical consultant on staff who can help us to implement these things once we decide what to do, but the project coordination we've kept at a pretty minimum and bare bones level. And then finally, there's the additional technology development that you may want to approach and embark on. And the example of a use case for how you develop a piece of software has been proven over time by many different entities. And that approach starts at the beginning of a process with a goal in mind. It goes through a number of iterations that the software is actually developed to help you then implement those goals, right? So in the Marine Debris Database example, we actually cross-referenced all of the different collection cards from a marine debris record, right? So that you could look across all of the cards were submitted from a marine debris cleanup and understand whether or not you're talking about a tire or a piece of rubber or another way of thinking about those things. So there's a number of ways that we use semantics and technology to be able to cross-evaluate and then demonstrate the results of that query across the universe of cards that were out there, right? So that's an example of a kind of technology development that took a number of different tries to get right for if you want to make sure you're querying the data correctly across those. So that's the one example of a use case that we've been through, but I feel like the RPB is a great opportunity for us to think of another desired function that we could then go through this exercise with. Now this will cost more because there's going to be additional kind of needs from a software coding development, a design element, etc. And so in summary, we've currently been to date at the kind of level of a basic maintenance and a half coordinator, half technical consultant position, right? So we've been maintaining the status quo pretty well. And, but I would recognize that the challenge of that is the uncertainty associated with the end of one grant cycle and the beginning of the next. Because to effectively develop a piece of technology that's going to suit you well over time, you need to be able to have a long-term plan in place that says, this year we're going to focus on this capability, the next year we're going to build on that with the next piece of funding, and therefore you can have a comprehensive vision and goal for what you would like to have developed. It's kind of sad and shocking to me today that a Silicon Valley investor is willing to put $5 million into an app like Instagram or Facebook just as a startup cost, and yet we, as an ocean community, spend on average something like $80,000 a year for a tool that helps us manage a resource that's as important as the ocean, right? So how do we align our actions with then a strategy that we can continue to develop over time with funding as we move forward? That's a challenge probably for the RPB as well as for a tool development, but those are some of the challenges that we face, right? While we have you here, there is opportunities for you to provide direct input to us. So we have both flip charts at the back of the room. If you have ideas for data to incorporate into the portal or catalogs for us to connect to, please write those ideas on those flip charts at the back of the room. We'll leave them available up for the next couple of days and use them on Thursday for part of our discussions. But while I have you here, it's at least worth having you have that direct opportunity for feedback. And then finally, this is an opportunity. Again, the slides will be available later. The more engagement we have from each of your member entities, the better our products are going to be. So this is an open call and opportunity for you to have somebody within your agency designated to help us out as we move forward throughout the next year. So thank you. Steve will now take all of your questions.
And before we get to questions, I'm just going to quickly remind if anybody does want to provide public comment in our last public comment opportunity, please sign up now and I'll be grabbing that in a few minutes.
Comments, thoughts?
Just going back a little bit to Courtney, what you were saying about the ocean assessment, and then also thinking of the tie to the data portal. One of the thoughts I had, and it's a brainstorm, is if we could take the ocean assessment, the priorities that came out of that regional breakdown West Coast wide, and think about where the Washington subregional team is now and see if we could, through their exercise, whether we go with the subregional strategy in the long term, but as a test bed, look at their mock cable exercise, look at the ocean assessment, and see if the way it's designed is usable in how we're talking about some of these issues as a test bed of, do we want a story map or another way to assess it? And also to see if your ranking works out the way it did. Like, I was thinking that there are a lot of assumptions in the ranking of, 40 studies in Southern California around fisheries may seem like we don't have a data gap, but if we have 45 managed fisheries, different fish species down there, then we do. And that's not, I don't know if that's the case or not, but there's some assumptions there that maybe like a case study through the Washington subregional could help us refine that.
I think that's a good suggestion, yes.
One of the thoughts that Steve and I had is whether or not we should be formally signing on to the agreements of the sub-regional planning team, and or, what is the way that we can continue to formalize our association with the regional planning body as it moves forward, given that we're still only tangentially connected to this entity. So we had thought that maybe joining on to that agreement for the sub-regional planning team in Washington might help us to engage with that community better. And I'm not sure what the group would think about that, but that was something that we had pondered.
Since I'm supposed to answer all the questions, right? So I did want to respond to your comment about using the Washington subregion and maybe the cable example as a test case. I think that's a great idea on a couple of levels, not just because it's sort of a mock case that we could work through to assess the assessment, but also to try some of these things that even were raised today, like can we geo-reference the studies so we can actually determine, is it just in Puget Sound, or is it all of the Washington coast, or is it all of the West Coast? That's a process that we don't have built out yet. And if we were going to build that out for the whole assessment, it'd be good to know what does it take to do a small piece of that, so we know what the resource needs are and what the time and effort to make that happen would look like, as well as is the assessment doing what we think it does as far as you said, the ratings. And I think that also extends to the same thing for building out potentially story maps or data assessment tools or anything else we would do with the portal. The numbers Andy put up on the screen for what it takes to build a tool, well, that's a shot in the dark. I mean, that's a hypothetical tool that doesn't have any question associated with it. We don't know what the data needs really would be. We don't know what's available out of the box and what would have to be developed specifically for that purpose. So I think we need that kind of guidance, as Andy said over and over. And then, we have the advantage, at least in the near term, of the more funding that we're working under now to do something. Once that funding's gone, we don't know, honestly, what our next funding will be, but at least we would know what it takes to accomplish a particular goal and meet those kinds of needs. And that would give us a leg up on knowing what we need to be looking for. So I think it's a great idea.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. Rosina DePoe, I'm the Chief of Staff to the Makah Tribal Council. I have a somewhat related question, more of a concern with the possibility of net neutrality being on the chopping block. How is this potentially going to impact access to the data portal? I know in Indian country there are concerns with us already having rural broadband challenges, that this could make things even more challenging for rural areas. And so I'm just concerned of potential impacts this may have on accessibility to the portal, or if you have any.
I don't have that answer. I think there's still opportunities to talk to your Congress people about your opinions on that and the FCC, so please do that. But I think, at a stepping back a level, the tools that we've built the portal with to this point, because it is a federated data catalog and it's really giving you a means to identify data sources and where they sit, it's a very low bandwidth kind of platform in general. It's when you get into the mapping and visualization and tools that it becomes high bandwidth. So I don't think, at least at a very basic level, that any of that issue of what speed of access, are you on satellite, are you on high speed broadband or something, something else, even dial up potentially still. I don't think that necessarily limits your access to the basic function of the portal, but it would influence potentially these more complicated tools. That's why I'm here.
A little bit of a shift, so if we need to follow up on that, we can. But in getting at the ongoing a kind of Rodney Dangerfield aspect of the portal and the relative to its importance. I'm just wondering, well, a couple questions. One is, how do you view fitting into the other structures that need and use geospatial information and knowledge systems and decision support systems that are all assets you can help provide? Pacific Coast Collaborative, Ocean Partnership. You showed that you had migrated to the RPB, but I'd argue that as an asset, you're far broader than that, but we still haven't quite figured out where the RPB fits within those constructs. So maybe we just set all that aside and say that regardless of the sort of coordination and decision-making structures and governance structures, we all need this information, and it should just be foundational. And there needs to be some sort of a surcharge, if you will, for folks that are engaged in these activities to support that information and decision support system. And I'm not sure how we shift that model so that that doesn't become a biennial beg for money, and instead is just cost of doing business if we're going to do these sort of activities. And I don't have an answer to it, but it's got to be better than a pass the hat or bake sale approach. And I think it needs to be foundational to entities engaging in these sort of geospatial governance activities. It should just be, we need the information, we need the decision support tools. This is your cost to engage in that. I'd just like your thoughts on that and others' thoughts as well on how we get to that.
Well, I'll give you at least an initial thought, and I'd love to hear from the rest of the group. I think you're absolutely right that we can't do this with bake sales. I'm not much of a baker anyway, so I don't know about Andy. But I think there's a couple of things going on. One is, as a partnership of a bunch of organizations, we grapple with this, and I don't have the solution. We grapple with this problem of everybody has their own data that they essentially, they're responsible for, they pay for, it's budgeted, blah, blah, blah. And maybe for a lot of the things traditionally that entity is doing as a management decision-making body, that's all the data they need, or it's all the data they think they need. But now that we're looking at these bigger questions, that doesn't hold up so well. But it's hard to figure out how to change the structures that pay for that. I'm paying to generate all this data, and now you want me to give that all to you, and also pay to get some of your, somebody else's data into the mix. That's a tough one to solve. I don't, above my pay grade. But I think, you're right on the other end of it, which is, I always like to think of data as infrastructure. We pay to build the interstate highway system because it allows us to do lots of other things, commerce and, move around goods and services in our nation. Everybody recognizes having that infrastructure is valuable. We do that with lots of kinds of infrastructure. Everyone uses it. It's just kind of a tragedy, a commons thing, perhaps. I think data is the same way. Without data that's of high quality from reliable, authoritative sources, we can't make decisions. We don't have that infrastructure in place. And what often happens traditionally with geospatial data is people go out and create their own version of the same thing 6 other entities already have. I don't know that anyone's ever done the cost analysis on that to say how much money's been wasted recreating data that's already out there that somebody else had, but we didn't know it. But that's the point of something like the portal, is it's a way to find out, does somebody already have the data that I need? And if so, I don't have to go spend the time and money to create it again. So at least gut level, which is not the best way to make decisions always, it seems like you can save a lot collectively, for the public good if we share that information more effectively. But the problem is, as Andy said in the talk, it's not free. We can't do that for you, and we don't have a staff to do that for you. And at least at this point, we don't even really have a governing body to tell us what it is exactly you need, because our founding, body, the WCGA, sort of has morphed and changed over time, and now it's the partnership. But when's the last time the partnership met? We haven't heard from them in a while. We've heard from you more than them. So I think that's a challenge. We're here to help you with the technical and the data side of it. But I think, again, we don't have the capacity as a portal to do the rest of that. But you do, potentially, as the RPB. So if you want to adopt us, we're up for adoption.
All right. I take that as adoption papers, signed, sealed. So just a couple questions that you guys raised. I like Becky's proposal about using the subregion in Washington as a place, as a test bed. We're not to that point where we've looked at the data needs from that mock project yet. We're not there quite yet. We're still working on the authorities piece. So it might, we kind of have to work through these things in sequence a little bit. But I like that idea, given that we have a lot of data from our state planning process. That's stuff that we want to get into the portal, that we've been negligent on working with you guys as closely as we could to get it into the portal as is. So I think that's a good opportunity. I don't know that you need to be on the team, but I think what the sub-regional team should be thinking about is, where is that opportunity to plug you guys in when we get to those conversations about data and data needs. So I don't think you have to sign on to the charter or the agreement. We'll just get you on to the work group and calls, that kind of stuff. So it's something we need to talk more about probably, but seems like a good idea. So I just wanted to also respond on, not on the funding part. I'm going to just leave that lie. Those are hard problems I'm not designed to solve right now at this late time in the day. But on the ocean assessment, I want to say thank you, Courtney, for your work on putting it in a format that's more easily navigatable and digestible. So thank you for that. I know it's hard work to do that. So I will say that in terms of the questions, we'll never have a complete inventory, which you've sort of acknowledged. And is it worth getting into that? I think to the degree that if there are major things missing, yes. So certainly something I'm putting on my to-do list is to look at it and make sure that the work that we've done as part of our planning process is reflected there. And if it's not, that's a big gap. And so, I think we're never going to have every single study that's done on the West Coast in there, but the big stuff we should have there. And so at least I'm putting that on my to-do list, because I do think it's important when we start talking about gaps to have a good foundation to work from, as good a foundation as we can. And to that, I noticed the focus on peer review, and I certainly appreciate the peer review process, but certainly many of our projects that we funded as part of our planning process were not peer reviewed, and they're still really the best available science and data that we have to support a planning process. So I think we just all need to recognize that there's a variety of types of data out there, and just because they're not peer reviewed doesn't mean we shouldn't use them, and understand them, and work from there to identify data gaps. So I think I'll stop there, other than there was another question about storytelling versus the inventory and what that looks like. I think for those of us around the table, if we've got the inventory to use it and access it and help make it better, that's great. I do feel like storytelling might be the better use for the forward, outward facing part, because I feel like that's the part that people may get more use out of. I don't know. That's just my sense.
One more thing I just forgot to mention about the tables reflecting the number of studies is multiple times, like it will, in the inventory, it'll just list either a specific group that's working on whole number of topics. And so that one, they might have, 30 or 50 different projects going on or over a countless number of years. And right now in the inventory, it's difficult figuring out how to rank things based on quote unquote quality. So that one that has a large set of information, or for example, the Washington Marine Spatial Plan is also included in the inventory, but both of those are given a value of 1, even though that is going to be providing more information than one scientific study that covers, a very specific region and one species, for example. So we were kind of grappling with how can we get an idea quickly to represent the quality of the data that's there. And so saying the type of study was a very quick way to do it. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that a number of the resources listed in the inventory have a lot more depth than what can be seen by just seeing a number.
Brandon Fraley, Tallawahdaini Nation. I'd like to challenge the RPB as a body to establish a goal for 2018 to find secure funding for the data portal. It should be one of our top priorities because they're the ones giving us the information as a decision-making body, and without them, we'll be making poor decisions. So I would like to identify that and talk about it tomorrow in our closed session about strategizing for funding, because it has to be identified as a goal in 2018 to give you guys some assurance. We'll be talking about it.
I would just add that while we are in a different place than some of the other data portals, this is not unique to our regional data portal. The long-term operations and maintenance are building, on the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, they did get some large cash infusions to build it, but the operations and maintenance in the long term is something they're struggling with. So I think I agree entirely that this should be a goal. We actually set it as a goal last year and didn't hold ourselves accountable. So I want to hold myself accountable on that as well. But also I think it's worthwhile to continue engaging at the national level to understand how some of the other regions are working to solve this, and if they have some lessons learned for us.
For what it's worth, I've had conversations with other data portal entities around the country, and they struggle with this as well. There doesn't seem to be an agreement for long-term investment in this kind of a resource yet. It's been funded, particularly by entities that have an interest in seeing the ocean plan succeed, but their goal wasn't necessarily to fund it over the long term. It was to get it stood up and then to back away. But I think the idea that Steve brought forward of an infrastructure that we can all depend upon for decision making, that has value along the West Coast. As you know, our ecosystem boundary spans the entire West Coast. It is called the California Current Large Marine Ecosystem for a reason, right? And our economies, many of our economies are closely tied to how well we manage that resource. And how well are we really managing it if we're blind to these information gaps or needs? And promoting kind of an information infrastructure along the West Coast and thinking big about whether or not that's a governor's level agreement for funding, or some kind of promotion of an endowment for, that kind of infrastructure over the long term, I think is where this group and others should be thinking about, so that we don't have to continually ask and answer these questions.
I had one more, question, and then maybe follow up. We heard, both Jens talked about different planning efforts. The San Diego county area and then the Washington, and showed how replete the data systems were relative to information. But I guess my question is then there was a statement, well, we need to get that to you. So is the portal functioning more as an archival at this point? Or, because in my mind, it should be on the front end as the framework, and so if somebody wants to engage in some planning, it's built in, okay, this is going to be the data framework for that, rather than an archival once the planning's done. And if that was integrated more explicitly, then there could be, because most of these efforts do have a funding stream to at least limp along in them, right? Or is it just duties as assigned? But it just seems to me that it shouldn't just be an archival, that it should be on the front end.
If the agreement is made that the portal is going to be the tool that hosts the information that's going to be used to make decisions, and that entities who are engaging in that process by the provision of their data and information, that's their responsibility, then that lowers potentially the workload for us to go out and find it. But there's also a desire and a need to have a different perspective on maybe how that data is being presented. And in earlier discussions this last year, Steve and others came up with the idea of a portlet, which is you can use the same technology to support the access to the information. You just put a different window dressing on the front entry to it, right? So the San Diego portlet could just have a front web window built onto the same system in the back end that focuses on the needs of that community. Recognizing, though, that the data is still stored in the infrastructure that's used to do that doesn't change at all. It's just that you're providing additional catalog curation tags. You're providing then a different web entry to it. And that's certainly possible. And it leverages the investments that you've already made in the development of that system.
So along those lines, then, I'm assuming that the concept is fully scalable, so you can have this grandiose, but you can also come in at the local level and be down in the benthos for that particular need, right? And then it would just roll up as needed.
Yes. And it's important to point out that to date, we have focused mostly on geographic information, data, and resources. But the ability to create a project level metadata tag that can provide you with windows into other systems that exist that provide data for specific purposes. Like we do have records that will get you to Nanus or Senkus or Scoos, as an example, as data providers that are very important for that near real-time information, right? So it's not just a connection to that one type of information. It can be broadened depending upon that need. Looking at you, John.
Yeah, checking the clock. I checked our list and back, and I saw no public comment sign up. So I think that will probably bring this section to a close. I'm going to do a quick recap, but definitely grab these guys at the reception, and we'll be talking more about this over the next couple of days.
Yeah. No, actually, put that money in the kitty for the portal.
Okay, so let me just check to make sure. I didn't see any signups for the public comment. One last check. Okay. I'm going to do a very brief meeting wrap up here. It shouldn't take more than 45 minutes or so. Just kidding. You wish I could spend that much time here at the end of the day. We are like right on the edge of being perfectly on time. So quickly, I just tried to snapshot some key themes we heard today. highlighting the regional role of the RPB, looking at subregions as they proceed. How do we more actively and effectively share updates and the information of what we're actually doing, getting that out to folks so they know about it, tapping into existing networks and stakeholders. And obviously this last piece is a key one, and I don't have any detail on it, but the feedback you all provided was really helpful on that related to data and information. So just for context of how we're going to proceed here, this is our public RPB meeting. Tomorrow we're going to have a closed session that's going to be for member reps and staff of both the RPB and the Ocean Partnership, talking about a lot of the same things we talked about today. And then on Thursday, we're going to be having breakout sessions. We'll definitely have summaries of all of those conversations as well. So we have a full recording that's been running all day of all the slides and the audio. So that will be on our website soon. So that's just the pure recording. We are going to do a report, and meeting summary that will include more detailed summaries of the comments as well as all the slides. So that'll be up soon as well. We're going to do a post-meeting webinar, like I said, probably in January. So for folks that want to follow up, ask more questions, or if they weren't able to attend today, to do that online remotely. And so look for more information on that, looking at outreach, getting feedback from you on how best to do that, all ears on that one as well. And then looking at the regional and sub-regional development, and then the assessment and the data piece is critical throughout. So we will be continuing to talk about that. And beyond that, I just offer myself up to connect with anybody here or others that are attending remotely, or generally folks that you all know that would be interested in learning more. Please have them get in touch with me, and I'll be connecting with our members as we move ahead. With that, I am then going to hand over to our Fed co-leads, as they are the last co-lead that hasn't had the formal spotlight, to give us words of wisdom to finish up with today.
Given any words of wisdom? Wow, that's a statement on what we've contributed today, John. One, I did want to actually follow up with a comment we got during public comment session about how we're going to capture and share what the RPB discusses tomorrow in the closed session. Is that going to be part of the summary and the follow-up, or how are we going to handle actions out of that meeting?
Yeah, my understanding was that we would have a summary of that, maybe a condensed summary of the conversation tomorrow, but be able to share that. It might be a separate report from the public meeting report for today, but I think ultimately it's up to the group in terms of how we want to share that information.
Okay, I did want to address that while the public was still in the room. So I want to thank everyone again for the participation through what was a freezing cold day, and now is nice and warm now that the sun's set. But really appreciate the involvement, the contributions from the public, from the members. I think we continue to see progress. It's a challenge. This is a big region with a lot of diverse issues and a lot of really concentrated focus on these issues, and how do we bring it all together in a way that makes sense. So I appreciate all of that. I'll turn it over to Joan for her words.
I just wanted to second or emphasize too the thank you to everyone for coming. Really is good to have the public here, to have people who are interested in what we're doing and what we're trying to do. And all I could say is at this point is, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And we have been resilient, emphasizing that, getting through a lot of our startup here. And I think we have the legs to go on to continue. It isn't going to be simple or easy, but I think we have a lot of tremendous amount of commitment. And I think that'll stand us in good stead as we move into the 2018. And I know we all have the heart and soul to try and make this all work out. So thanks.
So on that note, we do have a reception now. So you all have paid your dues and get to hopefully enjoy a beverage. It is going to be at the Veranda Grill and Deck, which is out here to the left end of the deck. You turn up the stairs. So it's right at the back of the boat. You'll see the little veranda grill. They had initially set up an outside space, but it sounds like it's still quite blustery outside, so we might be stuck inside. And if you want to venture outside, you can. But go out this door, take a left, walk to the end of the boat, and take a U-turn up the stairs, and that's where we will be. Thank you, everybody.